Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Double Feature Reviews. Thank you for sticking with us through all of the single digits. Enjoy the last one. I'm Livy.
I'm David.
I did mean the last one of the single digits.
Yeah, it checks out.
Unless something goes really wrong, this is not the last episode of the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Sound of Music and Cabaret. And I think both of us have seen these multiple times. Although this is maybe our first time. No, we watched Cabaret together before, but I don't think we've watched Sound of Music together before.
You've seen both of these before? You've seen them all on stage and on film?
Oh, no. So my complete history with The Sound of Music is that I have seen the film probably dozens of times. I have listened to the original cast recording with Mary Martin, and I have seen, I watched this not because I thought it would be good, but as research for this podcast. I watched The Sound of Music Live, which is in this series of, I'm not totally sure why they exist, not live in front of an audience, but filmed and broadcast live.
On
television, series of musicals. They've also done Grease with Carrie Underwood, who was underwhelming, but Audra McDonald as the Mother Abbess, and she was amazing. But I did want to watch the live version because there are a meaningful number of script changes from the original show to the film. So I just wanted to know what was going on there. And then for Cabaret, I haven't seen it on stage. I have seen the pro shot of the Sam Mendes production, which was... Sam Mendes actually changed it quite a lot from the original 1970s production. So I actually don't know that much about the original version of Cabaret that this is an adaptation of.
It's also got a lot of buzz for the new stage production with Eddie Redmayne.
Yes, which we almost saw when we went to New York, but it was very expensive. We saw Chicago instead, so we did get our Fosse Candor Ebb fix.
I think Sound of Music is probably my most watched movie.
Mm-hmm.
I've probably seen it more times than any other film in my life, partially because I started watching it as a very young person.
Well, there was a phase a couple of years ago where you watched it like every day for 2 weeks.
I don't think that's true.
I do think that is true.
I think for 2 weeks there was some time each day where I watched the movie.
Okay, but you didn't get through
I wasn't
the whole thing.
watching it from beginning to end.
That would be silly.
That would be silly.
You only do that with Les Miserables.
I don't...
You did do it with Les Miserables.
I first saw Sound of Music on television in one of its various holiday times showing that it used to be regularly seen, and loved it as a child. And so I would watch it every year when I knew it was coming on television. I watched a lot of television as a child. And I saw for Sound of Music, I saw on stage twice, I think as a teenager, once at a smaller community theater, and then a more professional production at a regional theater. I haven't seen the Carrie Underwood version. I mean, I've seen a few clips of it, but not the full version. Cabaret, I think I first saw it with you. We watched the Alan Cumming stage production, the Sam Mendes version that you mentioned. I don't pronounce Sam's last name correctly. I always feel bad about it. Mendes?
I think it's Mendes, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's something different, and I always do it wrong. I am sorry, Sam. I'm sure it's a big problem for you. So I watched the Cabaret with the Sam Mendes, Alan Cumming Cabaret with you, and I think I watched the film first after that, but I don't think we've ever watched it together.
So you watched the film first after that?
No, I'm sorry. I watched the film after that, okay. But I've definitely seen the film before we watched it for the podcast.
The first time you watched the film was after you saw the Sam Mendes
That's
pro
correct.
Shot. Okay.
Yes. So my title for the series is also a reference to the world of musicals. I don't know how much we've said in the episode that these are both musicals. They're both very well received, very famous musicals, Broadway musicals. And The Sound of Music is probably best known now as a movie. Very much best known now as a movie. I'm sure, like I said, it is certainly done on stage. Cabaret was a very well received film, but has continued to be very popular as a play in its own right.
Yeah, the Sam Mendes production was running for like a decade.
Yes. So my title for the series is also a reference to another musical in various forms. My title is Springtime for Hitler in Germany, which is sampled from the film The Producers. Originally a 1960s film, not a musical film, but a film about people putting on a musical. Sort of the joke of the film being, what if somebody made a musical that was like a fun musical about Nazis? That you couldn't ever do that. That would be ridiculous. But if you did, he would have been over a top version. And it's probably the most famous line is, I believe Hitler himself comes out at the beginning of the play and sings "Springtime for Hitler in Germany" about his beautiful rise to power. And I don't know exactly what the timings are between Sound of Music, Cabaret, and The Producers, but the film The Producers, the original film, but these are all coming out not too far away from each other, mostly in the middle of the 60s.
Yeah, so I believe The Producers is 1967. The Sound of Music is originally put on the stage in 1959, and Cabaret is originally put on the stage in 1966. So The Producers is after both of them.
They said it couldn't be done, but we did it twice. It
already had been.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to describe either The Sound of Music or Cabaret as being about Nazis.
Right.
Certainly not Sound of Music.
That's true.
There's like 2.5 quote-unquote Nazi characters, and neither of them is a main character or even featured.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like in The Producers. It's not a fun musical about being a Nazi. That would be pretty difficult to pull off, I'll give you that. But maybe that one scene in Cabaret, but we'll get there. But it's certainly as close as we get to that standard.
Yeah, so my title for this double feature is Can Nazis Sing? Because I think these two movies give very strongly opposed answers, and this might actually be the connection between them. So the answer that Sound of Music gives to Can Nazis Sing is emphatically no. Only the Austrians can sing. They have perfect pitch. Nazis don't even like or understand music. And in Cabaret, we have the Tomorrow Belongs to Me scene in which Bob Fosse is very emphatically saying, guys, yes, Nazis can sing. Don't be lulled into a sense of complacency. They will also use music. Sound of Music is a lie. Casablanca is a lie. Heads up, kids.
I think that's tough on Sound of Music. I think we're playing into the narrative a little bit. Sound of Music never said that Nazis can't sing. They never try.
It merely implies that Nazis can't sing.
We don't get to that point. They don't show up singing. That's not part of the Blitzkrieg, or the Anschluss in this case. But fair enough.
Well, we don't get to see the Anschluss.
Maybe they were.
It happens. There's a time break.
They march through the square. I think that counts. That's part of it. They're not marching around, to get to breakfast. Presumably.
I think they might be marching around.
They might be getting to breakfast. Actually, I do take that back now.
So if you haven't seen either of these films, or if it's been a while, David is here to give you a refresher on what goes on, spoiler-free, more or less.
Yeah, I think most people have seen this one. So I think you probably remember, but if you don't, the plot of The Sound of Music is that a high-spirited nun helps to unite an Austrian naval captain and his 7 children when she takes over as their governess shortly before the Nazis invade.
She is not a nun, for the record.
Postulant. For Cabaret, which you may or may not have seen, the plot is not about a high-spirited nun.
They don't have Jewish nuns.
That's true. We do get into that. That's a great point.
We could maybe say it's about a high-spirited woman and someone who is not a Jewish nun.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to... I'm going to edit the words high-spirited into my plot summary.
Beautiful.
So, to respect your insight. As Nazism takes hold in that... Let me try that again. Livy, is it Nazism or Nazism? What's the deal?
I think it is Nazism. However, the majority of people say Nazism.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with your analysis.
If we're treating this as an English word, if the majority of native speakers are doing something and they are understanding it, that is real English.
Okay, so we'll say... As Nazism takes hold of 1930s Berlin, a British writer and a high-spirited American nightclub singer try to forge a life that fits their own values.
Beautiful. And now we're going to really get into Sound of Music. You Gotta Wait, Cabaret. This is a 1965 musical directed by Robert Wise, written by Georg Hrdalek, Howard Lindsay, and Russell Crouse. Quote, suggested by the memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers by Maria von Trapp. It stars Julie Andrews as Maria, Christopher Plummer as Captain Georg von Trapp. Welcome back, Christopher. We haven't seen you since episode 2. You're much younger now. Eleanor Parker as Baroness Elsa Schrader. Richard Hayden as Max Detweiler. Peggy Wood as the Mother Abbess. And Charmian Carr as Liesl von Trapp. And not in a particularly large role, but I do want to shout out Marnie Nixon finally getting to be in front of the camera in the role of Sister Sophia, one of the nuns who sings the How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria song, because Marnie Nixon has done a lot of work as a voiceover singer. She did Natalie Wood's vocals in West Side Story. She did most of Audrey Hepburn's vocals in My Fair Lady. She did a lot of Deborah Carr's vocals in The King and I. This was mainly a secret. She was not given credit for a lot of her work. So in payback for the work she did on West Side Story, Robert Wise wanted to let her go in front of the camera. And he also hired someone who could actually sing, finally, to be his lead. So Julie Andrews was able to do all of her own singing. And while we're talking about voiceovers, at least the majority of Christopher Plummer's singing vocals are being performed by Bill Lee,
who is the husband of the performer of Sister Agatha, standing on the screen left of Sophia in that scene. She's the one with the very round face.
And the glasses?
And the glasses.
The memoir, The Story of the Von Trapp Family Singers, is listed as being only suggested by, not based on, because there are a lot of changes from the real-life experience of the Trapp family to this one. First of all, those are not the children's names. They all had different names, and I have no idea why they changed them. It's not like they sing the names at any point, and they need to fit a specific meter. Also, the oldest child was a boy. We switched that out for a girl, because you gotta have that Nazi telegram delivery romance.
One of the reasons they moved the names around is because one of the children was named Maria, and they didn't want to have two Marias in the movie. So when Robert Wise and Maria von Trapp met before the production of the film, and Robert made very clear to Maria, this is not based on your real life. This is inspired by your life. Sorry about that. But, she knew what was happening going in, and Maria wasn't aware and supportive of the production. She actually appears in the film in a very small background extra role. So the story, Maria von Trapp's life story, is largely dominated by scarlet fever. Scarlet fever destroyed part of Maria's home life and forced her to move in with an abusive uncle. And that's part of what led her to have a lot of personal, social problems growing up early in school, and then decide that maybe she wanted to become a nun, partially because she was so excited about music, and the church was really the only source for musical culture in the area where she was living. Georg von Trapp was a very successful naval military officer, was decorated by the emperor, and after the World War I, his wife and all of his children also contracted scarlet fever. The children all survived, but his wife didn't. And this left him alone and struggling to take care of his family. And the youngest child, still suffering from scarlet fever, was not able to participate in school, so he asked the local abbey if he could hire a nun to give this one child private lessons at home, and that's how he met Maria. And he needed a wife, he needed someone to take care of his family, and Maria wasn't actually fitting in that well at the abbey. She was a very high-spirited person, and she is known throughout her life as having a very strong personality. So he became infatuated with her, and they were married. This was actually at the beginning of the 1930s, when he was still wealthy, but not long after that. As political tensions between Germany and Austria got worse and worse, he had all of his bonds and investments moved from UK banks to local Austrian banks to help support the local Austrian economy. And then when it became clear the Germans were going to invade, the Austrian economy collapsed and he lost all of his money. So he and Maria had to begin touring their family as musical singers to make money. Once the Nazi government wanted him to come work on the submarine and he said no, he realized that they needed to leave the country and so they left. They didn't actually climb over the mountains. They just took a train to Italy. And
Much less romantic.
they started touring Europe as a family, doing musical numbers and telling their story. And their people were really interested in their story as well as their music. And so they were approached by a German book publisher. They wrote a book, a memoir of their life. And this was turned into a very successful German film. Not a musical, a drama film that did feature the family singing and had some musical content. American producers saw this German film and said, this is going to be a great musical. Turned it into a full-fledged Broadway musical, primarily as a vehicle for Mary Martin, who I know of as a really famous Broadway star of that time. I don't know exactly how famous or what she was working on.
So she'd worked with Rodgers and Hammerstein on South Pacific. She was the original Nellie Forbush. She is probably most famous for playing Peter Pan, which I don't actually know if that was before or after her work with Rodgers and Hammerstein. But there was a pro shot of that one. So she's probably most famous for playing Peter Pan, but she also originated 2 Rodgers and Hammerstein roles. She's not a soprano. I don't know if she would categorize herself as a mezzo or an alto, but the role, all of the singing parts, all of Maria's singing had to be transposed for Julie Andrews, who is a coloratura soprano.
Is that higher or lower?
Higher.
Got it.
Oh, I did forget to mention when I was doing the metadata that this is a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. Richard Rodgers wrote the music for the stage show, and Oscar Hammerstein wrote the lyrics for the stage show. They did actually delete several songs for the film and added some new ones. Oscar Hammerstein was dead by the time they were filming, so Richard Rodgers wrote the lyrics for the new songs, and I think you can tell.
Yeah, originally, when the stage production was being created in the end of the 1950s, Rodgers and Hammerstein were brought in to write one song of that production. But the results were good, so then they were brought in to write the whole thing.
Do you know which song it was?
I don't know what the one song is. It's widely known that they brought in one song, but what that song was is something of a secret.
I think it's got to either be Do Re Mi or The Sound of Music. But if it's not one of those, I would be very interested to know about that.
You just feel like they fit their musical
They're just
style best?
the biggest ones.
Oh, okay. In 1962, after the stage production had done very well, 20th Century Fox said, we're going to turn this into a movie. Originally, they wanted to bring in William Wyler. He was attached to the project, but didn't take it very seriously, so they kicked him out for Robert Wise, who at that time was maybe the world's most successful musical director, because West Side Story had taken the world by storm, won a ton of Oscars, made a lot of money. It was a huge cultural landmark. Robert Wise made the decision to bring in Julie Andrews, who was not a household name at this time. Mary Poppins had been filmed but not released. Mm-hmm. This was actually Julie Andrews' 3rd time playing Maria von Trapp. She had played the same role earlier for television twice. Once on a television production, she was just there singing for a Christmas special, singing My Favorite Things. And then later on, she did a parody of the stage production Sound of Music with Carol Burnett, where she is Maria, and the family has 30 children instead of 7, and Carol, they're all boys except Carol, who's sort of the only tomboyish girl.
So she wasn't in actual full stories of Maria.
No.
She was in vignettes.
That's right, but she had some familiarity, I suppose, with the material. Charmian Carr, who plays Liesel, was hired for the role with absolutely no acting experience or singing experience professionally. She had worked as a model and had trained in dance some, but had never done any type of acting at all.
Well, she is in the dancing role. Like, Liesel and Rolf are there to dance so that you don't have to hire any of your older singers to also be dancers.
Christopher Plummer was brought into the movie mainly because Robert Wise was very concerned that the movie was going to be seen as over-saccharine, sickly sweet, and Christopher Plummer has a very cynical, somewhat charismatically abrasive personality style, and he thought he would bring a sort of darker edge to the role. So this sort of gruff captain who's not sure he's down with all these singing things is very much Christopher Plummer's own personal experience. He has said that he thinks the movie is good, but he's also part of the camp of people that really like to make fun of the movie, and he considers it somewhat embarrassing that he's so well known for this and not for his more proper dramatic roles.
Yeah, and since we talked about the differences between this film and reality, Captain Von Trapp is portrayed as way more like gruff and harsh in the original show and in this film than he was in real life. I don't think he did not force his children to wear identical uniforms and answer to whistles and spend all day marching and not playing.
Yes, he had a very loving, close relationship with his family in real life. I think the stage version of Captain Von Trapp is a lot more bland. He's just some guy, and he's kind of busy, and he's conventionally attractive. Those are basically his descriptions. And it is largely Christopher Plummer in this movie that is bringing that more edgy aspect to the role, both as a sort of a gruff person and as someone who is eventually is swept away by the music and magic of it almost unwillingly.
Yeah, and I think that, that works for the beginning. He creates a really strong impression at the beginning of the film, but I just don't like his performance at the end of the film. I think it just looks so weird when he smiles. I feel like Christopher Plummer is someone who does not naturally smile a lot.
And I think the only scene where he's doing a lot of that type of smiling is in the Something Good sequence.
Yeah, the gazebo scene.
It's interesting that you mentioned you don't like his smiling the Something Good sequence because, in fact, what he's doing is laughing. Because he and Julie Andrews just found the blocking of the scene where they had to put their faces right next to each other and sing a long song. They found this really, really funny. And it took them 6 to 8 hours to film the scene, over 40 takes. They had to take a 2-hour break in the beginning and tried to come back, and they still just couldn't stop laughing while they're doing it. This is part of why the film is shot so much in shadow. Because Robert Wise eventually realized, I am not going to shoot this scene successfully. The actors are having too much fun. This is not going to happen. And
instead of changing the blocking at all, because the words are not funny. Instead of changing the blocking at all, we're just going to put them in the dark?
Yep.
That's the strat?
That was the strat.
Okay, well, that was also the strat for Climb Every Mountain, which
That's right.
has several shots where the Mother Abbess, who is singing, is just bewilderingly standing in the middle of the dark.
Yeah, they really struggled with the lip syncing. The Abbess was not really prepared to sing the role, and
I believe Peggy Wood is mainly a stage performer, not a screen performer.
So yes, both of the scenes in the movie where things get kind of dark all of a sudden, yeah, that's not a coincidence. It works, I think, kind of well in the Something Good scene. It kind of fits the change in tone that's happening at that point in the story, getting a bit more adult. But it's a practical necessity. Principal photography began in March of 1964. The film was shot on an $8 million budget, which was a ton of money at the time. It was a big budget movie. There was a lot of fun happening on the set. Sometimes too much fun. Robert Wise had to come and scold the children a lot for being too silly. And
you should have played Georg. You got this down perfectly, Robert.
Robert Wise and Georg are not totally different in their personalities. He also is a warm person and very engaging. Robert Wise is famous for a very high level of preparation. Everything is planned out. And they struggled to fit the schedule of the shooting with the bad weather that happens a lot in Austria. So for every day, there were multiple plans of different things that could be shot depending on the weather, and he was not going to let this become an impossible production. That's part of why Robert Wise has so much respect in the film industry. Is he's one of the few people that really is able to merge artistic integrity with production integrity, and part of it is because he just plans everything out in a very meticulous level of detail. The scene where Christopher Plummer is getting mad at Julie Andrews about the children and the boat, and he accidentally says "Captain" calls Julie Andrews Captain. That was not in the script. Christopher Plummer genuinely said "Captain" on accident, and Robert Wise said, "That's perfect. That's going in the movie."
I actually think that's not perfect, and I do want to talk about this in a bit.
Okay.
But you go ahead and tell us.
Yeah, there were a lot of mistakes that got into the movie. In the earlier song that was also added to the movie where Maria is walking...
I Have Confidence.
I Have Confidence, where she's walking through Austria. There are several points where she sort of, let's just say, cutely trips over things and has trouble getting there. That's also not in the script. It's supposed to be all elegant, smooth dancing.
What? Why? Have you listened to the song?
But decided at the moment that maybe that was the way to go for it. It was a 6-month shoot. It wrapped up right at the beginning of September of 1964. The film was released in March of 1965. Initially, the response was mediocre, mid. It didn't hit the number 1 position until the 4th week that it was out, but then it stayed in the number 1 position for 30 of the next 43 weeks. One thing I try to avoid is really analyzing box office inflation-adjusted records, this is a very controversial problem, and this is not a forensic accounting podcast, but this is certainly among the most financially successful films of all time because it's had many successful theatrical releases. It was in the theaters for years when it came out, and it's probably in total made well over $3 billion in ticket sales now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, regardless of inflation and multiple releases, when it left theaters, it was the highest grossing film of all time. It was the film that knocked off Gone with the Wind, which had been the highest grossing film of all time for a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
The industry response was positive. It was nominated for quite a few Oscars and won quite a few Oscars. It won for Best Picture. It won for Best Director. It won for Best Scoring of Music, Adaptation, or Treatment, as we're continuing to swirl around the exact names of these categories.
We've tightened that one up.
It won for Best Sound and Best Film Editing. Julie Andrews was nominated for Best Actress, but lost to Julie Christie for Darling. And Peggy Wood was nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
I'm not sure I support that one. The other two Mother Abbesses I have seen or heard are both doing a much better job than Peggy Wood.
I think Peggy Wood's performance is very good, especially since she's not doing her own singing. She's not actually in the film that much.
No, I believe she is doing her own singing.
Peggy Wood?
Yeah.
No, Peggy Wood is not doing her own singing in The Sound of Music.
Who is doing the vocals?
I don't know.
Okay. It's a secret?
Yeah, as you pointed out earlier, this is not information that was heavily publicized at the time, so I don't actually know. Maybe I don't know if it's a secret or if it's well known. I would say Christopher Plummer and Charmian Carr are probably more in line for Best Supporting nods than Peggy Wood, but Peggy Wood was a big household name at the time. That's a fact. It lost a lot of Oscars to Dr. Zhivago. That was the other big film of that year.
Julie versus Julie.
And in that year's Oscars, there was a big effort by the film industry to kind of set them up as rivals. Ooh, two British Julies. Who's going to win it? But they were actually really good friends, so it never really worked out. At the BAFTAs, it was not nominated for Best Film.
Oh.
Nor was Dr. Zhivago.
What won the Best BAFTA that year?
My Fair Lady.
Fascinating.
So it's not like musicals are out or anything that any American people happen to be in is out. No, it's just that we really liked My Fair Lady, which I am not a huge fan of.
My mind is blown that Sound of Music and My Fair Lady came out the same year, but I guess that's true.
You think of My Fair Lady as later?
Yeah, I think of Audrey Hepburn as being a later actor than Julie Andrews.
Nominated for Best Film at the BAFTAs was also Grigory Kostintsev's Hamlet, which is a very well-respected Soviet production of Hamlet, and Sidney Lumet's The Hill, which is one of my favorite films of all time, with Sean Connery, a military prison drama about independence, and yeah, that Sound of Music and Dr. Zhivago and The Hill and Hamlet, 4 really good movies, all lost to My Fair Lady. I feel like the BAFTAs made a big miss on this one, I have to say.
Did they not include the final 45 seconds in the British release of My Fair Lady? Because then it's a much better movie.
Julie Andrews was nominated for Best British Actress at the BAFTAs, but lost to Julie Christie for Darling. The Sound of Music has a 83%.
Oh, for Darling, not for Dr. Zhivago.
I don't think Julie Christie was in Dr. Zhivago.
Julie Christie is the star of Dr. Zhivago. That was a big year for her.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It's also interesting because...
I mean, she's the romantic interest of Dr. Zhivago.
Okay. I did not know that.
Omar Sharif is the star of Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah, see, that's the name I was most familiar with. Yeah, that is doubly interesting because at the time in the BAFTAs, it was quite normal for someone to be double nominated. In fact, that year, Julie Andrews was double nominated for Best British Actress for Sound of Music and The Americanization of Emily. So... yeah, Dr. Zhivago, the British, we don't like Dr. Zhivago, I guess.
Interesting.
The Sound of Music has an 83% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think shows that even though there are lots of people that love this movie, including me, I love this movie, there are a lot of people who don't like this movie, and who feel like it's sickly sweet and overly positive. And we'll get into it later, but they're a powerful force in the critical world. It has an 8.1 rating on IMDb with 264,000 votes. sounds a bit low, honestly, for a movie of this stature.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, it's probably not evenly distributed amongst super filmsy people who are the type of people who would rate on IMDb and the general populace. And I think a lot of people probably saw it when they were kids and like haven't thought to go rate it on IMDb. So we're talking about production, we've jumped around a lot, but when we're talking about the actual film, I'd like to go a little bit more in chronological order.
Yeah, I know this film so well, or I have such affection for this film. I could do a frame by frame commentary on this, so that sounds great.
So I did, when we were getting ready to start watching this, I said something about the film doesn't actually start for 3 minutes, and you seem to reject this concept. David, what's your defense of all the mountain shots?
Well, first of all, it's exceptionally beautiful photography. There's nothing wrong with that. I remember in our review of Oppenheimer, you mentioned how much you missed having those naturalistic contextual shots. Also, I think that to really enjoy Sound of Music as a movie, other than just to enjoy it for the fun show that it is, you have to see it as a fantasy. And this is actually something that the writer of the script, Mr. Lehman, I believe is his name, he's written several excellent scripts, talked about how he wanted it to be a classic European fairy tale and wanted to fill it with that magical sense of wonder and with a overarching structure that was more than just the individual plot elements that are coming in. But in my interpretation of the movie, this mountain is a magical mountain. And the things about it are magical. And its natural beauty, and the people who are able to connect and appreciate that natural beauty, these people are granted special powers to communicate intimately through music. And so to appreciate the movie, we open after the establishing shots with Maria on the mountain, feeling so free and able to sing so powerfully. And you have to appreciate the mountain for what it is, as a beautiful natural landscape, to appreciate this experience that Maria is having.
I would be a lot more convinced by this argument if the shots were clearly of one mountain. Mm-hmm. Like, it's shots of a mountain range, and we're hitting very different geographic areas in it. And so I don't connect those opening shots to when Maria's talking about it's my mountain, because I'm like, that was just a bunch of mountains that we saw. I don't know which one is hers.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult. There are a lot of mountains in Austria, and they do kind of blend into each other. So maybe the whole mountain range is magical. I'm not sure.
Well, then you got to put that in the script.
Draw that geographic line. But this conversation that Maria has with the Mother Abbess in the early parts of the movie is, of course, an important fact at the end of the movie. They're able to escape from the Germans because Maria has this intimate relationship with this mountain or mountain range.
Yeah, I feel like you could totally have fixed this for me by just pluralizing it. Like, I could never get lost on those mountains. Those were my mountains.
That's a good idea.
I was brought up on them. That's my script doctor for Sound of Music.
Take that, Mr. Lehman.
Then do you want to talk about I Have Confidence, one of the new Richard Rodgers lyricized songs?
Yeah. Well, I Have Confidence is not, I think, an especially catchy number. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much it's there to kind of add a slightly more swingy sound to the soundtrack, something that a bit more 60s in tone. Also, a lot of the song is about recapping the plot and making it clear to people what's going on in the story.
So I think I know why that song is in there. The DVD I have that I got when I was, 14 or whatever, does have a commentary by the director. And he wanted a song to montage Maria from the Abbey to the house. So obviously you can't do that on stage, so there wasn't the need for such a number. She just appears at the house. But Wise decided that in a film he wanted to show the transition, so he asked Rodgers to write a song for that.
Well, my opinion is that the idea of montaging Maria from the Abbey to the house is a great idea. Partially because we need that transition as a film audience, and partially because there's lots of great content of these cool scenes in Salzburg, and they really help to add visual color to something that is very pretty looking, but often quite plain and basic on the screen. So I think that's a great idea. I just don't think it's a very good song, and I don't know that we really want to have Maria singing I definitely don't think we should have Maria singing these words. She's really telling us how she's going to feel at the end of the next scene. She's not super confident in her opening experience with Franz and Georg and the captain.
Yeah, it seems like the song needs to go in reverse.
I think it really should have just been Maria walking, stumbling perhaps, through these settings while we listen perhaps to the previous song, How Do We Solve a Problem Like Maria, either in some different arrangement, maybe an a cappella, maybe instrumental, but I think the montage strategy is very good, and I totally agree with Robert Weiss's choice as a cinematographer, but I think his choice as a musical arranger is quite questionable, and it doesn't make sense to add another song here. And it's really talking down to the audience, even to the child audience, to ask for this second summary of the first 6 minutes of the movie. And anything, I think, makes the story a bit more befuddling. It gives the impression that something very important has happened that we need to take some time to digest, but actually nothing has happened. We're still just starting the movie.
Yeah, so in the original, My Favorite Things comes a lot earlier than it does in the film. So in the film, she sings My Favorite Things to the children when there's a thunderstorm. In the original, she sings My Favorite Things with the Mother Abbess. And as she is walking out of the abbey, we get a brief reprise of My Favorite Things, which is in code telling us that she's nervous right now. So a slightly more advanced literary device. It's also a lot shorter. I mean, they don't have the montage because they're on stage. But yeah, I think the problem is, it seems like Robert Wise, or possibly Richard Rodgers when he's writing these new lyrics, didn't really understand the character of Maria. She's talking about how timid she is to be going out in the world, and everything we've seen so far of her does not give us that impression at all. I think, so the actual Maria was, I believe, 19 when she went to go work for the Traps?
She was 19 when she entered the Abbey, so she was in her 20s. At this time.
Okay.
I don't know all the details of that, but maybe she left right away, but she was 19 when she entered the Abbey.
Okay, she was quite young. So, and Julie Andrews is like 35. So I feel like I maybe could have bought this more if I was hearing it being sung by a younger person. It's like, I've never been out in the world. I don't know what it's going to be like. I'm like, yes, you do. Yeah,
and Maria is such a world-wise person in so many of her interactions after she joins the family. In a way, it's there, or it fits a little bit like with her first 3 or 4 minutes of entering the house. But that's because she gets to the house and she's so intimidated by its size and its standing and the servants and everything. That doesn't really fit with how she feels when she's leaving the Abbey.
Yeah, if you needed a song there, like it might even be better to go the complete opposite direction and have her be like, I got this. I'm so excited to be working with these children, who she has said that she likes to work with children. And then she's like, oh no, this is bad.
I think the choice to cut the My Favorite Things exchange with the Mother Abbess from the stage production is a very good choice. Because what I think, again, makes the film work is this fantastic fantasy story that is sort of mixed with a Judeo-Christian theology, eschatology.
Okay.
Where, like, in the visuals of the How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria scene, the mother is clearly, I think, representing like the God figure, and she has the sort of good angel and the evil angel. Again, the story fits Jewish mythology in some ways better than Christian mythology.
She's got Sister Margareta and Sister Berta on her shoulders.
Yeah, as the accuser angel, and for the character of the abbess to work, she can't be like a real person that has a real conversation about her own feelings, and Maria helps her to connect with her childhood. No, she's there to represent like the divine will. And so I think if we try to bring her down to that level, it's going to really break this magical realism that's happening in the film.
Wow, you have seen this movie too many times.
I disagree with the last part, but I've seen this movie a lot. I think that's what audiences are responding to, is this highly stylized and elevated arrangement of How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria, where they do get to represent these idealistic concepts.
Yeah, so I want to go back to what you said about how, like, I don't remember exactly what you said, but once Maria gets there and she's interacting with the family, she, like, seems very competent. I actually don't like that. And they meaningfully changed the dialogue in the scene. In the film, it's after they've all fallen in the water and they meet Elsa. And then the kids go inside, and Maria yells at Georg about how he doesn't pay attention to his children.
And he calls her captain.
And he calls her captain. Christopher Plummer.
Christopher Plummer called her captain.
Christopher Plummer called her captain.
Yes.
I'm interested that not My Fair Lady, the other one, Mary Poppins, hadn't, so many musicals that year, that Mary Poppins hadn't come out yet. Because to me, in that scene, she's playing the character way too much like Mary Poppins. Mary is this magical figure who like always knows exactly what to do and how to get the children to behave. Whereas Maria is way less savvy. She's not good with people. She's good with mountains and singing. Julie Andrews is playing her like she's got this whole plan worked out, and she's very cunning and canny in how she delivers all of her lines to Georg. And she seems sort of self-satisfied and pleased with herself when she, gets him to make the next logical step that she wants him to make, which I don't think fits the character of Maria at all.
I don't think she gets what she wants out of that conversation.
Yeah, well,
it doesn't go very well for her.
The problem there is that she's forgotten that he can fire her.
Yes.
So it seems very weird because I'm like, Maria, why are you saying that he can fire you? So apparently she's forgotten that, and that's another reason why it doesn't work. But I think the scene makes much more sense with the original dialogue and the way I saw Carrie Underwood directed to play it, which is just like genuinely emotional about the plight of these children. And she doesn't have a thought out argument that she's trying to lead Georg through.
I think that does sound more realistic, and I think it would make for a more effective naturalistic drama. But this is not a naturalistic drama. And what I think that doesn't do is showcase Maria as a different type of hero. That's heroic, not because she's such a powerful person, but because she is brave, even though she's not in a position of power.
I disagree that it's showcasing a different kind of hero, because it's exactly the same as Mary Poppins.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I can't compare Mary Poppins to. I haven't seen Mary Poppins enough, so I don't know.
I also haven't seen Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
I have seen Nanny McPhee.
I have seen Mary Poppins once, maybe twice.
I may have seen all of the scenes in Mary Poppins, but definitely not all in one time and in order.
I don't think of her as a heroic figure in Mary Poppins. In Mary Poppins, she is this external force of divine will. Mm-hmm. She's not really even a character at all, and though we are sometimes impressed with her abilities, we're not impressed with her heroism in that story.
Yeah, no, that's not the argument I was trying to make. I'm saying like she isn't going to do this perfectly. Whereas the argument that she set up seems too perfect.
I think it's...
She is intentionally making an argument, not expressing her emotions. And I feel like they do that I feel like in the original script is coming in there with this like genuineness and naturalism and naivete. And that's sort of her angle of heroism.
I don't think the real Maria has that energy at all.
Okay, well, the original Broadway Maria.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think this is partially influenced because Wise and the lady who's starring in this movie, Julie Andrews, did spend time with the real Maria von Trapp. Uh-huh. And in real life, she is a very calculating person, mm-hmm. a very forceful person. And part of the reason that she fit into this family so well is that Georg is actually, the real life Georg, was a relatively reserved person, was actually a little bit shy. And so Maria was the person who was managing and working as the executive of the family. So I do think the real Maria was a very forceful person.
Okay.
And I think what they're trying to show there is that Maria is, yes, she's very intelligent and she's very forceful and brave, but she's not actually that savvy. I think you used the right mm-hmm. term before. So she's making a good argument, she's making good points, and we as independent observers are very convinced by what she's saying. But Georg isn't convinced. I don't think she succeeds
at all.
I
think Georg is convinced and he's mad that she's right. That's how they're playing it. I think he knows
that he's right a little bit, but she's failed to actually convince him because she's created a political situation that he's mm-hmm. not willing to accept.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like they were not being influenced by Mary Poppins. They were being influenced by the actual Maria von Trapp. But they'd already written a show for a different character.
Yeah. I think I like this version better. I just
think it's inconsistent. Like you can make this very savvy Maria who is going out there to fix this family and she knows exactly how to do it. Or you can do this like very genuine, natural, nature-y person who sort of guilelessly brings them all together. But they alternate scenes on what they're doing.
I think that at the core, the character of Maria in this film is idealistic and principled. Mm-hmm. So she is not guileless. But I also don't think she has some master plan where she's got it all planned out. Her plan is she's going to say what she thinks, and she's got her own ideas, and she's going to express her mind when the thoughts hit her head. And that is a good way to gradually convince people if you get them to tolerate you for long enough. But that's a bad way to get people to do things in the short term. And I think the movie does a good job of showing both the good and the bad of that strategy. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that one of the other big changes from the original production, like you mentioned, is that a couple songs were cut. Specifically, or maybe most prominently, the songs that are sung by the Baroness.
And Max.
Max.
Yeah, the Max, his role stayed relatively the same without those songs, but the character of Elsa Schrader is her function in the story is completely different from the original to the film. And I think the film makes it less interesting. So in the film, she is Maria's romantic rival. And she's different because she doesn't like the children. She wants to send them to boarding school. And she's also rich and wants to live her rich, glamorous life with Georg. Stage Elsa doesn't really have that much interaction with Maria or the children. When she first meets Maria, she's a little bit concerned that this hot young woman is living in her fiance's house. But then Maria mentions that she's going to become a nun, and Elsa sort of writes her off like, oh, she's not a problem, she's not a threat. And her function is not to be Maria's romantic rival, but to be a foil to Georg's position on the Nazis. So the stage show is much more about the Nazis than the film, where they kind of don't show up until the very end, or the final third. So the second song, the trio with Elsa, Max, and Georg, is about Elsa and Max saying, look, the Anschluss is coming, the Nazis are going to take over. Just sort of, I know we don't like the Nazis, but just sort of play along and ignore them and they won't hurt you. And Georg refuses to do this. And I think that's a much more interesting conflict, because right now, in the film, the moral conflict is between the Austrians and the Nazis. So, like, the opposing force to Georg is the Nazi party. And it's very easy to make them villains, and no one is going to identify with the Nazis. Well, actually, some people will identify with the Nazis, and they done fucked up. I think it's a much more interesting and nuanced and challenging thing to do, to have your options be both people who don't like the Nazis, but people who are willing to ignore them and minimally cooperate, and someone who is actually going to be defiant.
I see these changes as very necessary to making the film successful.
Interesting.
I appreciate the conflict that's set up there to some extent. I like that song that they sing. Also, it's a very nice song.
The Elsa and Max songs are probably the funniest songs.
Yes. They have the most adult themes. Mm-hmm. And, I'm happy to listen to that song at any chance. It's a great song.
Including them might have cut down on the "this is too saccharine" criticism.
Yes. But I think that it doesn't actually present a more interesting moral dilemma. The audience is not going to be like, yeah, actually, let's all just sort of tolerate the Nazis and kind of half go along with it. That sounds good. I think no one's going to buy that.
I think way more. I don't think anyone's going to agree with them, but I think way more people are going to see themselves in Max or Elsa if they actually have an established political position. Like, people are more likely to say, oh, am I just ignoring the fascists among us and hoping that they don't bother me?
I think the film is very intentional at making Elsa totally apolitical. Mm-hmm. Elsa doesn't have any interaction with the problem of the Nazis. Her issue is purely personal about her relationship with Georg and Maria. And for me, one thing that I really like about the movie is that I can talk about people, and I can say, as I've said many times to many people, the Baroness did nothing wrong. Because she doesn't really do anything wrong. She has one kind of actually bad line where she talks about sending the kids to boarding school.
She is also deliberately trying to drive Maria away because she knows that she and Georg are in love with each other.
Well, she says that she knows that they may have some crush on each other, but the game of romantic rivalry
She's lying, David.
The game of romantic rivalry is an open game. It's not a bad thing to pursue a romantic partner against a rival. That's not an immoral thing to do. So the Baroness is
But she's lying. Is lying moral?
Where is she lying?
When she says he'll get over it.
You think at that point Maria is the love of Georg's life, and if he doesn't marry Maria, his life will be ruined.
I think Elsa sees Maria as a real threat to her engagement, and she thinks Georg is going to dump her for Maria. She's trying to get Maria to go back to the Abbey, and she is successful.
But that's not an immoral thing to do. That's not wrong.
She's lying to Maria about it.
She doesn't tell Maria that... Okay, because she says he'll get over it when she's talking to Maria?
Yeah, and he doesn't.
I don't think it's clear that he doesn't get over it. He's not unhappy to be with the Baroness until Maria comes back. When he comes back, he maybe is more interested in Maria. And okay, I'm not saying that he and Maria don't have a connection, but he's not despondent over
Yeah, I mean, I guess I
Maria.
am. When the children do go visit Maria, they try to visit Maria at Nonnberg Abbey and she won't see them, and they come back. They're all lying to their dad about what they were doing because they don't want to say we were visiting Maria because they know that they'll get in trouble, which would only be a problem if their dad has complex feelings surrounding Maria. There are several lines where, like, he doesn't want the kids to talk about Maria.
Yeah, I don't remember if in the film the confrontation with the children, if Maria's name ever comes up, but I don't think that Georg is depressed about not being with Maria. That's not the impression that we're given in the film at all.
I mean, when she does come back, he sort of awkwardly gets around to saying, like, the children missed you.
Yes.
He's
clearly interested in her.
I missed you.
Yeah. He seems to be genuinely interested in the Baroness as well. I think at that point, Georg hasn't made up his mind, and he has two people that he's interested in, and he doesn't know which one he wants to really be with. But it's not bad for the Baroness to recognize that and try to create a situation and convince him to be with her. That's the natural human thing to do.
Okay. I don't think the Baroness is evil, especially in a film where there are also Nazis. But I just think it's a much less interesting dynamic to have her be Maria's romantic rival, a thing we have seen thousands of times, than for her to be Georg's political foil.
Yeah, I do see how it's more standard, more stereotypical. I think that's a fair point. But I think the moral conflict in the film is not anything to do with the Nazis. The moral conflict is about the love triangle. And it's like, okay, if you're already kind of half engaged to somebody and then you meet someone else that you kind of like better, what is the moral thing to do in that situation?
Then why is the last half hour of the film not about that at all? I mean, if you want that to be the story, then cut this whole running away from the Nazis part.
We're running away from the Nazis because that's part of the action plot of the story, not because that's part of the moral dilemma that the film is proposing. I mean, in that part of the film, we're seeing the actions and the choices that people have made earlier in the movie play out. You know, we're seeing Rolf...
I actually think we're not, because of another small change that they made from the stage play. In the stage play, Maria is the one who has the idea that the captain can't go to Bremerhaven tonight because they all have to go sing at the festival. In the film, the captain is the one who comes up with that idea. So in the stage show, like, the fact that he chose Maria instead of Elsa is necessary for him to save his family. Whereas in the film version, this is an idea that he comes up with on his own, and Maria is not really instrumental in the escape.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we don't know if he had stayed with Elsa, would he still be trying to escape? Would it be in a totally different political situation? I mean, well, another change that from the original is that the character of Rolf is actually presented in a much more negative light
in the film
mm-hmm. than he is in the stage production. At the end of the stage production, he is the one that really actively saves the family and is sort of sacrificing his own gain to do something that's right. I think in the film, we see Rolf as a character that is, because he aligns himself with the Nazis, he ends up in a totally defeated position. He's not attached enough to the family to go with them, to help them, to have one last nice moment with Liesel. He's only able to impotently not do anything and feel probably embarrassed in all sorts of ways for the rest of his life. And I'm glad to see him in that more punishing role. So I don't think the last part of the film is meant to present a moral dilemma. It's meant to show how the moral choices that people made earlier in the movie there are good and bad consequences as a result.
Yeah, I'm unconvinced. You have not convinced me to have movie Elsa is better than stage show Elsa.
Yeah, I think that stage show, I think maybe the best parts of the stage show are Elsa songs. I think those are probably, because I think
the original Elsa did win the Tony for Best Featured Actor.
I think that's probably the best music in the stage show and probably the most interesting parts of the stage show. But I think that's also because the stage show doesn't have the powerful aesthetic momentum that the film has. And I think in the film situation, we're better off appreciating the fantasy story and the political action story than we are doing this, trying to make it into a naturalistic drama.
So I'd like to ask, would you have preferred it if in the film script Maria is the one who comes up with the idea that they all have to go sing at the festival?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
That should absolutely have been kept. And I can't defend that decision at all.
Yeah. I know I'm pretty hard on the movie, but one thing that I do think is way better in the movie than in the stage show is the placement of the reprise of 16 going on 17. So in the movie, Liesl has had an interaction with Rolf. He tells her to deliver a telegram, and he's very official, and he doesn't want to hang out with her or kiss her at all. And this is very sad. And so Liesl sort of abstractly talks about this with Maria. And then they do the reprise of 16 going on 17, where Maria says, "The love, sit tight on the love. You'll find a better boy."
He does appear to be a
later.
Nazi, so I would just cancel this
I do
one.
think he is a Nazi.
Sounds like it's a drop him situation.
Maybe when you're 18, you won't fall in love with a Nazi. Whereas in the stage show, that happens earlier and kind of unprompted. Like Liesl sees that Maria has just gotten married and she's kind of asking for life advice based on that. And the Rolf scene happens immediately afterwards. Whereas I think that scene is better if it's prompted by an actual heartbreak in Liesl's life.
I think there's the decision to move the Do Re Mi from the initial meeting of Maria and the children to this later sequence is great. We get to have more actual, the children and Maria start off as enemies and then they're able to come together. And that sequence of Do Re Mi is filled with so much excellent cinematography and so much interesting ways that it's playing with time as we're moving through the song and the children are learning to sing all in one song, but then this is represented by showing that a lot of time is passing between these events, and we get to see how Maria is able to form this connection with the children. And I think, I don't sing. That's not a talent that I have much at all. But I think the film is such a powerful depiction of the magic of emotionally connecting with people through music. Probably the number one scene that even the cynical people tend to have a positive response to is the moment where after they have this confrontation about the boat and Christopher Plummer calls her the captain and then he hears the music and he walks in and he is overcome. I've heard some cynical film critics admit that they did cry when they watched that moment. And it's because Georg is so incapable of having an emotional connection through conversation or even shared experience with the characters. Again, not the real Georg, just the character of Georg. But it is through this experience of music, which it's heavily implied that his wife was very musical, and that part of why he's shut out the joy of music and other things in his life is because he's afraid of having that connection that he lost with his wife. And that for the first time in years, he and the children look directly at each other and have this deep emotional connection without any words being said. They're just singing a folk song. And he comes and he starts singing, and the children are able to see his experience, and then they change. They stop singing the song that they had planned to sing, and they say, okay, we're just going to sing a harmony underneath our dad because we want to... And they have a real emotional, intimate connection. And I think, even though, again, I don't sing, that's not the thing I experience, I really do appreciate that feeling of there are many ways to communicate with people. There are a lot of things that can bring true harmony between people, and I think that's something that can break through even if you don't think the rest of the film is too cynical. Hopefully you can appreciate that part.
Okay, you ready to do Cabaret?
Let's do it. We'll come in to Cabaret.
We'll work on it.
Okay.
Cabaret is a 1972 musical directed by Bob Fosse, also choreographed by Bob Fosse. The writing credits are going to take a while. So the music is written by John Kander, lyrics by Fred Ebb, Kander and Ebb, The book, so that's all the non-sung words, is by Joe Masteroff. This is based on a Broadway show with the same writing crew. The stage show is based on the play, non-musical play, I Am a Camera by John Van Druten, which is based on the novel Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood, which is based on Isherwood's own experience in Weimar, Berlin. So our, I guess we could call him audience surrogate character of Brian Roberts, who is played by Michael York, is sort of inspired by Isherwood. The star of the show, though, is Liza Minnelli as Fräulein Sally Bowles, along with Joel Grey as the Master of Ceremonies, or MC. Joel Grey did originate the role on Broadway. I believe everybody else is new. And you will also see Helmut Griem as Maximilian von Hoyne, Fritz Wepper as Fritz Wendel, and Marissa Berenson as Natalia Landauer.
So, like The Sound of Music, this is also an adaptation in a long line of adaptations. The film Cabaret is based on the stage play Cabaret, which is based on a collection of books called the Berlin Stories. In particular, a novel inside of that collection called I Am a Camera, written by Christopher Isherwood. Christopher Isherwood is a writer and academic who lived in Berlin starting in the late 1920s. He left England because he was gay and wanted to be in an area of the world that was more accepting. Initially, Christopher Isherwood was very apathetic about the rise of Nazism and was attempting to just sort of live a bohemian life of his own, and did share cheap lodgings with a well-known nightclub singer, and they formed something of a relationship. And a lot of the events in the story are based on real events in their relationship. The woman that the story is based on eventually became quite unhappy with the way that she was portrayed. She, as the inspiration for Liza Minnelli's character, she's in fact a very devoted Stalinist communist, and felt like she was just portrayed as a lush and a fool, and was slut-shamed by the production.
Yeah. Jean Ross is her name.
Thank you. After the Broadway show had already been running successfully for several years, there became momentum for it to be adapted into a film. First was optioned for a film in 1968 that moved between a few different studios. Bob Fosse was added in the early 1970s, and it was his decision to bring back a lot of the homoerotic elements from Christopher Isherwood's books into the film, when they had largely been edited out of the pre-1972 stage productions. And the character is Brian is his name in the film.
Yes.
He had a different name in the stage production.
Okay.
Also not Christopher, but in the stage production, the character of Brian was totally straight.
That's interesting, because when I was watching this, I felt like a lot of the queer content had been cut.
Yeah.
It was in fact added back in. I was feeling the cuts from the stage show, I guess.
From the Alan Cummings production, you mean?
No, not even thinking about the Alan
Oh,
Cummings
I see.
production.
You're feeling, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was Fosse did some work to bring that back in. Christopher Isherwood, for the record, actually was still pretty unhappy and felt like in the film, Richard Brian, whatever his name is supposed to be, him being gay is sort of a note for comedy and something that he's supposed to be embarrassed about. A small note is that you mentioned that one of the characters, Fritz, is also played by a person named Fritz. This is because originally all four of the main characters were supposed to have names that matched the actors that Bob wanted to cast to play those roles.
Oh,
but
it was
only
supposed
Fritz.
to be Liza, Michael.
No, Liza and Michael were not Bob Fosse's first choice. These were negotiations with the studio. So originally there was a person with each of these specific names was cast for those roles.
Oh, there was an actual Sally.
Yes, there was an actress named Sally who Bob wanted to play the role of Sally. But Liza Minnelli, of course, is the daughter of Vincent Minnelli, Hollywood royalty, and was known somewhat as a singer for this production, but was really just getting started as an actress. So she was a somewhat controversial casting, and this is really what pushed her to be a household name.
She's been in films since she was like 3. Her dad's films.
The film was shot on a budget of $4.5 million. there are a lot of changes between this film production and the stage production. Again, a whole major plot of the stage production is about a Jewish shopkeeper and the woman who runs the boarding house, and they have sort of a romance that is torn apart by the rise of Nazism, and that's not in the film at all.
Yeah, they've completely switched out all of the subplots. Also, I think the spiciest switch, and I want to get your opinion, and I also want to get the listener's opinion, is that they switched the nationalities of Sally and Brian. So originally, Sally is British, Sally is British and Brian is American. That's how it's done in the Sam Mendes production, and I think that's how it's done in the original.
In the original play, yes.
However, I guess Liza Minnelli couldn't pull off a British accent.
I believe that.
So Sally is American and Brian is British, and she's got this line where Brian does something prudish. He doesn't want to drink at 10 in the morning or something, and she says, "You're so British," and the line in the stage play is, "You're so American." And I think as an American, we definitely think of the Brits as prudes, but I can see how Americans are prudish in their own way. So what are your opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the stereotype that I guess I'll say I trade in is that leftist British people are less prudish than leftist Americans, whereas conservative Americans are much more prudish than conservative British people. Yeah. So to some extent, it depends on which aspect of the culture we're choosing to focus with this lens.
And we are all more prudish than the residents of Weimar, Berlin. Who
speak for yourself.
Maybe Sally has fully integrated into that, and she's talking to Brian from a Berliner perspective.
Yeah, I don't think so, but that's a very generous way to interpret it. I mean, in real life, both of these people were British, so they can just both be British, actually, but that's fine. We can have some transatlantic humor. I think, to me, the biggest or the most interesting changes, because though I do think there's a lot of literary value and dramatic value to some of these cut lines, we got to trim things down for the movie. What stands out to me is that several songs were added for the film that were not in the stage production. I would say the most prominent and successful songs were not in the stage production, namely Liza Minnelli's opening number, which is very famous, Mine Hair, and the comedy song Money that Liza Minnelli performs with
Joel Grey.
I would say these are probably the best two songs in the play, and they're not in the stage production. They're original for the theater. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you're sure they were definitely original for the film? Because I know that there were some songs that were written for the stage show that they ended up cutting. One of them, I Don't Care Much, did end up in the Mendes production.
Yes. Those two songs are original for the film.
Yeah.
And those are the two songs that, if you ask people about Cabaret, they're probably going to mention those two songs.
Well, they're probably going to mention Cabaret. I think Cabaret and Willkommen Bienvenue are big. Both of them are definitely bigger than Money. I'd say fair. Mine Hair probably makes up the trio.
Yeah, that's really the theme of the movie. That's what most people recognize. That's probably what most people remember is the song Mine Hair.
And I think they mostly remember Willkommen Bienvenue, Welcome.
That's true. I know that was, of course, in the stage production. That was really the focal point of the stage production. The character of the Master of Ceremonies is a bigger role and was a lot of what was considered eye-catching. The film was released in February of 1972, and it went on to make $42 million at the box office, so roughly nominally 10 times its budget. It was extremely critically successful. And it was nominated for a ton of awards and was more or less expected to sweep the awards, except that this was the same year that a less but somewhat heralded production came out, The Godfather, by Francis Ford Coppola. And this led to a lot of speculation, and the compromise was that The Godfather won for Best Picture, but Cabaret won for a lot more awards. It won for Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Scoring, Best Sound.
For Joel Grey, not for Michael York.
Yes, for Joel. I mean, I think Michael York is nominally the star of the movie. I think he's technically billed above Liza. Though,
he's the protagonist, but
Michael
also
York,
no one cares.
Whatever. Sorry, Michael. I like Logan's Run, so don't worry about it.
I like the Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet.
So yeah, Cabaret won a bunch of awards at the Oscars, did not win Best Picture, but was nominated. At the BAFTAs, it was nominated for many things. It won Best Picture at the BAFTAs over A Clockwork Orange, The French Connection, The Last Picture Show. So this was a big year with a lot of strong competitors. Yeah. The Godfather not nominated for Best Film at the BAFTAs.
Ooh.
Too American. Way too American. We're not participating in that stuff.
What are they even saying? It's like he's got stuff in his mouth. That is not a proper enunciation as Sir Lawrence was trained in.
So yeah, it mopped up really at the BAFTAs. It has a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 7.8 on IMDb with 60,000 votes. I think we'll have to say IMDb is not impressed. I think that's a fair... 7.8 is a very respectable score. 60,000 votes is not, and it's not nominated for Best Picture and winning all these awards levels.
That's interesting. And for some context, this is coming out in the 70s when musicals are really at their nadir.
Not cool.
No one likes musicals. This one, by being so edgy and so counter to Sound of Music, that's why we pair them together, is sort of why it was able to be successful.
I think one thing, the Sound of Music is sort of premiering at the beginning of the anti-musical wave, and the Cabaret is maybe coming in closer to the end of that anti-musical wave. One thing that I think makes both films very successful and able to push past that is the way that they rely on diegetic music. So in Cabaret...
Which is the other big change from Cabaret, because in the stage version of Cabaret, there's a lot of non-diegetic songs. Of songs that, like, the typical musical songs where the characters are kind of having a feeling and then they sing about it. Famously, the landlady... gets given a pineapple by her Jewish grocer boyfriend, and she sings a song about getting a pineapple, and it's pretty silly. And I think Cabaret is so powerful because we've got all these sort of schlocky nightclub numbers, and then Tomorrow Belongs to Me is like the standout.
So, both of these films, to varying degrees, lean away from some of the more artificial elements of musicals, which in a way come back in some of the musical, in Umbrellas of Cherbourg and some of the films after Cabaret, but are much more grounded. I know people who don't like musicals, and if you ask them why, a lot of times they will say it just doesn't make any sense. People don't just start singing randomly. They sing a song when it's time to sing a song, and they talk when it's time to talk. And so both of these musicals respect that idea. And sometimes it's time to sing and sometimes it's time to talk. And you wouldn't just start singing randomly. That would be weird. Cabaret, again, sticks to that idea entirely, which is why it's able to break through the anti-musical haze.
Yeah, I would like to ask these people if they've ever heard of a metaphor before.
Naturalism is the idea of our times. That's a fact. People love it.
Yeah, I'm still living in about, 1725, and so I'm here for the weird magic. Why is this even happening? I don't know, but it's pretty queer. So as I was saying, Cabaret in the 70s, basically only kind of grungy musicals are getting made. So there's Little Shop of Horrors.
I have not seen Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh, well, it's about a big plant that eats people, and there's a song that a dentist sings about what a sadist he is.
Lovely.
But part of this has to do with the fact that the neighborhood of Broadway got very unrespectable, and people didn't want to go there because they were afraid they'd get mugged.
Just like Batman's parents.
I can't leave my son all alone in a bat cave, and then
They didn't leave him alone in the bat cave. He fell down in the woods. They were presumably in the house. He was supposed to just be hanging out in the garden.
I don't know what Batman's
That's
doing.
not his fault. I guess it was in the woods, in their garden.
I'm not a Bruce
They didn't just throw him in a bat cave. Have fun with the bats, Bruce.
I meant leave him because they have died.
Okay, just purely metaphorically.
With their dying breath, Mr. and Mrs.
said, go to the cave.
No, they were like, oh no, my son, he's in the cave.
No, he was with them when they died.
I
He
don't
saw them
know.
get murdered.
I don't know what happens.
The cave was
in Batman.
before, and then they saved him from the cave, and then he was like, oh, my parents will always save me. Oh no, they died. That's why it's sad.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I've seen a whole Batman movie.
Good. I think you saw... I don't know if you've seen any good Batman movies. There's only one. Actually, that's not true. Anyway, this is not a Batman movie podcast.
Which Batman movie should we do? Let us know.
I mean, it'd have to be The Dark Knight. It seems like that's probably...
I don't know. I haven't seen any other ones, so I don't know if they're worth talking about.
No, you didn't see The Dark Knight. You saw The Dark Knight Rises.
No, I definitely have mostly seen The Dark Knight. I was in a room in which Dark Knight Rises was playing, but I was doing my Greek homework.
Got it.
Oh, another thing I wanted to mention that is a change, and it's interesting that Liza Minnelli was not Bob Fosse's first choice, because another more subtle change is that Sally Bowles is actually a very good performer. Like, Liza Minnelli is quite a talented singer and dancer, whereas the role of Sally, the original Sally, Jill Hayworth, was not in musicals. She's not known for her singing career. And most people who are cast in more modern productions, they're casting actors, not singers. And you kind of don't have to be able to sing, and in many cases, they want you to sing badly. And Sally doesn't do a lot of dancing in the original one. So it kind of makes sense that Sally isn't really going anywhere with her life. She thinks she's this great performer and is one day going to be a great actress, but it's very obvious to anyone watching the show that that's not going to happen. It's a little bit incongruous. You have to find a way to reconcile why the extremely talented Liza Minnelli is at this, like, fourth-rate, dirty cabaret when she actually could be having, maybe not, the most famous actress in the world, but could be having a real career in singing or dancing.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how this intertwines with the real history. In real life, Sally Bowles, I was going to not say her name, but we've said it already. Jean Ross is based on this real person, Jean Ross, and Christopher Isherwood in the book I Am a Camera goes out of his way to portray Jean Ross as bad at singing, even though she was working as a singer. And so we're kind of getting his review of Jean Ross's performances. It's actually, Jean Ross actually had potentially a very promising career in film, and was going to be likely a successful movie actress, but partially because of her political ideas, she didn't want to just jump into Hollywood, so she moved to the Weimar Germany to try to find a more bohemian community. So she was a very, very capable model and actress, was not particularly trained as a singer, but would sing in nightclubs, usually in lesbian bars, and wouldn't really try to sing the songs well, but would do it, in sort of like almost as a spoken word performance, which people found very entertaining and very powerful, but Christopher Isherwood thought was silly. And so, to some extent, this general interpretation of...
Sir Lawrence would not approve.
This general interpretation of the Sally Bowles character is of her being untalented, and that's just because Christopher Isherwood likes standard performance, none of this artsy stuff, thank you very much. So, I know what you mean. I think it actually works very well in the film. I don't see that same tension because the film is trying to give us this impression that this is just an area of the world where there's so much poverty and everyone's so depressed and distraught about everything that even if she is talented, life is unfair and she could never break free.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
I've reconciled this not by treating it as sort of like a tonal element, but as a characterization trait of Sally's. So, like, Sally is naturally talented, but, like, I don't think she can show up to an audition on time. I don't think she can get along with her coworkers.
The real Jean Ross was actually very professional and was a very successful writer and journalist as well as being an artist. Yeah. So she could make a deadline.
I will say, if this makes Jean feel better, to me, the character of Sally Bowles is so cartoonish that I did not assume that anyone was actually like this. I mean, she is almost wearing clown makeup. Yeah.
I think that's fair. And I do think an intellectual viewer or reader or whatever is going to realize this is not a fair portrayal of a person. But yeah, Christopher Isherwood really did his friend pretty dirty here and was like, yeah, let me just portray someone that treated me as a friend in the most rude and hurtful light possible. So I think that's part of where we're seeing this tension.
A lot of communist women named Jean getting thrown under buses.
Oh, that's true.
In our movie reviews.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Anyone out there named Jean, slow your roll. I mean,
don't slow your roll.
You're doing great, but they're going to slander you.
Don't let society take you, but you should get ready. They're going to come for you, Jean, and I'm sorry.
So we haven't really talked that much directly about Bob Fosse. Is this his the first film he directed?
No, the first film he directed was Sweet Charity, which was a major box office bomb, and almost got him blacklisted from the industry. And only because he already had a lot of respect from people in the theater world, and they said, actually, he would be really good for this project. He does dancing and stuff. You'll like it. So, no, it was not his first film, and it might have been none of his films.
Yeah, and he was not an automatic in to direct the film of Cabaret.
I think it's worth emphasizing that he did not direct the stage production of Cabaret. He's a person in the theater. I don't know that he had any interaction with the stage production at all. I could be wrong about that. but I don't know that it had any direction. The stage production was, and but unsurprisingly, directed by Broadway's most prolific director of the mid-20th century, whose name escapes me. Harold Prince.
Okay.
And Harold Prince was the first pick to direct, but he was busy doing plays, movies, Oscars. I don't care about that. I got to do my plays.
So Bob Fosse got into dance because a girl he liked was going to this dance school, so he joined to hang out with her, and then they broke up like a week later, but he was like, actually, this dance thing, I kind of like it. If you want to really get a sense of the revolution that Bob Fosse is bringing to the dance world, I recommend don't watch the whole movie Kiss Me Kate because it's not good. Just watch the scene from this moment on. He was not the choreographer for most of Kiss Me Kate, but the choreographer said, hey, Bob, I know you're good at this dance stuff. Do you want to choreograph your little sort of 1-minute duet section? So he did. It involved like a scream, sliding across the floor. He does a backflip from a dead standstill, and it looks very different to this like late 50s, big MGM musical dancing style. He couldn't do a balletic turnout, so he really liked to do moves with your feet turned in and your knees turned in. He started going bald, so he did a lot of hat work. So Liza Minnelli iconically flipping up her hat for "and bye bye" in Mein Herr. It's thanks to Bob Fosse's bald spot. And he also wasn't very good at straightening his shoulders. So he's like, okay, we're just going to make this a round-shouldered look. So
Liza Minnelli suffers from scoliosis. And
makes sense.
She said that, but painfully for her, Bob incorporated her scoliosis into the choreography. And so these difficult poses she would sometimes try to strike in an awkward way, which is very uncomfortable for her. He was like, yes, we're going to use that. Mm. She said that
the fact that you're uncomfortable.
Yes. It was, according to her, his direction was very much about dance as language, not about dance trying to make you look good.
But you mentioned that he tried to add a lot of the queer content back in. Had they like written scenes for the original show that had to be cut, or were they just had to pre-censor?
I'm not sure where that line is. I do know that the stage production took a long time to write, and there were a lot of rewrites. Because
it feels like damper has been put on the queer content already. So one of the added plot lines, which is not in the original show, is this sort of affair that Sally is having with a German baron, Maximilian. And as we eventually find out, she's dating Brian at the time, but to Sally, this does not mean that you stop sleeping with other men. So the two of them go off to Max's lovely country estate so that she can sleep with him. And it is after they've left revealed that Brian was also sleeping with him. And there's like some scenes that maybe are trying to give you the idea of homoeroticism between the two of them, but they're extremely watered down.
Yeah, there's bisexual content for sure, but not a lot of homosexual content. There's a line sort of drawn there.
Yeah, so there's this scene where when Brian has arrived, he opens the closet to put his clothes in and finds it's already full of shirts. And Max walks in and says like, oh, do you want to borrow my shirts? Here, wear this sweater. Blue looks good on you. And that's sort of the extent of the romantic scenes between Brian and Max.
Yeah, it's just that Max is sort of leering at Brian. So we learn that Max is interested in men, but there's no relationship there.
Okay, I want to know what you think about the really short cuts to the MC that occur like outside of the cabaret scenes. The most famous one is at the close of Tomorrow Belongs to Me, which, if you haven't seen it, is a song sung by a Nazi in a beer garden, which I think that scene is deliberately countering the Marseillaise scene in Casablanca, where everyone, in Casablanca, there's some Germans singing a German song in the bar, and then someone starts playing the Marseillaise. All the French people stand up and start singing the Marseillaise. France is being conquered by Germany at this time, and then like even the non-French people start singing the Marseillaise in defiance, because Nazis can't sing.
They can't arrest us all. They don't. What they need like a whole camp where they would concentrate us in. That they don't have the resources for that. They don't do that.
Whereas in this one, it's Hitlerjungen singing a song, a Hitlerjung singing a song, and then everyone except this one very old man joins in, and Max and Brian. I can't remember his
Whatever.
name
It's very confusing. His name's Christopher.
Max and Michael York don't join in either. They leave and get in their car. Everyone stands up and starts singing "Tomorrow Belongs to Me" because Bob Fosse wants you to know that the Germans also have songs. And then in the sort of final notes of that, we get a shot, which is clearly in the cabaret, but it's a pretty tight shot on Joel Grey's face. And he's got this kind of evil smile. And I wasn't totally sure what to do with that.
Yeah, I think in the film, we're supposed to get that the idea is Master of Ceremony saying, "I told you so," sort of implying, that's the conversation that Brian and Max are having as they enter the car. Brian, earlier on, Max had said, "Oh, the Nazis are bad, but we can control them." And then Brian says, "Are you sure you can control them?" And so I think Joel is sort of giving the same message to Brian. Brian is here trying to just live his own life. "Oh, I don't like the Nazis, maybe, but I don't really care." And he's sort of saying, "Okay, maybe you need to leave the country, Brian. Yeah, maybe they're out of control. We have a really big problem." So I think that's the impression where the Master of Ceremonies in the film is presented as the voice of cynicism. And everyone else is trying to live in this roaring 20s idealism. And the Master of Ceremonies is warning everybody, evil is here, and this is real evil, and it's going to be really, really bad. So maybe take action, but don't act like nothing's going to happen. It's interesting to compare this with the new Cabaret, the Eddie Redmayne version, where the Master of Ceremonies is not only the sort of chaotic, cynical character, the knowing clown that he is in this 1972 version. In the new version, he is the force of evil. And it's not necessarily him creating the Nazis, but he is not even warning people of the Nazis. He is, in fact, subtly directing people into their path. So I think we do see the Master of Ceremonies start as sort of the force of chaos and move more and more in these future introductions to sort of embodying the evil that's going on around. I think partially audiences and directors are less satisfied with cynicism as an answer to fascism. That's definitely, in our decade, not fashionable anymore.
Well, and I think it's also, people are not responding great to this new revival. Who actually directed it?
I don't remember her name, but I would say those moments where the Master of Ceremony is coming in and flashing his cynical grin and reacting.
Rebecca Frecknell.
That's right, Rebecca.
So I think one of the reasons that the people are reacting badly to the Rebecca Frecknell version, which is currently on Broadway, is because we're so used to the Mendes production. And he does the MC very differently than the original production, but that has kind of become the new standard. At the end of the Mendes production, when the MC says, "Auf Wiedersehen, a bientôt, bye-bye," he is revealed to be like in a concentration camp uniform with the tag indicating that he's Jewish, communist, and gay. So the Mendes production, the MC is a victim of the Nazis, and he just wants to have like a fun gay time, which is maybe makes him less different to Sally. Whereas in the original, which I haven't seen, the MC is certainly less anti-Nazi. Not sure if he's more pro-Nazi.
Yeah. I think Rebecca has used the term perpetrator. She has said that her MC is a perpetrator of the fascist movement, not a victim of it. And I think, personally, I prefer the 1972 interpretation the best. I really appreciate the strong imagery that this character is bringing. But again, the MC is supposed to be a representation of the, if not necessarily the divine, but the ideal. The MC knows everything that's happening and knows everything that's going to happen. I think that is something that comes from the original production, where even though we never see him say anything to that effect, we know that he's a modern viewer that's looking back on this story and commenting on it.
Yeah, he has no dialogue lines. He only speaks through the songs, if you will. So, to
have him be a victim makes some sense, and it's fine.
It makes him like a real person who is an actual guy who runs a queer nightclub.
And so I don't think that actually fits the best with the character. I think the character is best left as a mystery, as a phantom of some type. And so I haven't seen the Rebecca's version, and maybe Evil MC is great or bad or whatever. So I haven't seen it. I won't really comment on it. But I definitely appreciate the imagery from Sam's production, and I see why people would like that. You know, the MC's fun and kind of cool, and you want to hang out with him, and so you at least want to not dislike him and maybe feel a lot of sympathy for him. But you know, we can't. I don't think it fits the character's design to see him in a position of weakness that kind of implies that he was surprised and didn't know this was coming. He's supposed to be
Omniscient?
Omniscient, thank you. He's supposed to be omniscient.
Yeah, and it does sort of, you know, he's sort of representing the cabaret. And if he gets put into a concentration camp, it's like, oh, this is sad. The cabaret has died. When in fact, the cabaret is the problem.
Yeah, I do think, you know, one thing that Christopher Isherwood said about watching the 1972 film is that it was so unrealistic to him how much fun everyone was having. Because he said, no, at no point, not one meal, not one drink, not one outing that any of these people went on could I afford when I was living in Berlin in the middle of the Great Depression. No one had any money. This was a time of total abject poverty and desperation. And so, kind of like you're saying, I think in the Isherwood version, the cabaret is presented as a foolish, to use a term, diversion that people are seeking to close their eyes to the horrible things that are going on around them. And that is more in a negative way. I think that there is a healthy balance between these interpretations. And if you're suffering under political repression, being able to express yourself in a way that's free and find enjoyment in your life is something that is necessary, healthy, and constructive. But also, clearly we do see these people closing their eyes to the things that are going on around them and using this cabaret lifestyle to just enjoy the last few moments of freedom instead of make decisions for how to deal with the situation in their lives. And I wonder if the Alan Cumming version does over-glamorize the cabaret experience and sort of say, you know, isn't it great to have fun at the theater while bad things are going on around you? Which is a nice thing to think about when you're going to a theater, but maybe does soften the artistic impact.
So do you have any comment on this scene? It's an early sequence where we're cutting between two different scenes. One is a cabaret number. It's the mud fight, which is going on, which is intercut with Nazis actually beating someone to death. So there was it's you know, there's no dialogue around this, so it's not clear exactly what's going on. But it looks like maybe the bouncer in an early scene has spotted a Nazi in the audience and has thrown him out. You know, he's wearing an actual armband. Has spotted a member of the Nazi party in the audience and has thrown him out of the cabaret. And then either the next day or that night, this Nazi comes back with a bunch of his friends. They find the bouncer and punch him until he dies. And this is intercut with, the mud fight. And then later, I can't remember what we're intercutting it with. Actually, there's a couple of scenes where Joel Grey, where the MC and the cabaret girls are in like mock Nazi uniforms, kind of making fun of them. But it's unclear exactly what the goal of as more and more Nazis are attending the cabaret, and in the final shot, you see a bunch of them in the audience. As, you know, there are more and more Nazis attending this show, they're having to adjust what's being represented on stage.
Yeah, I think that this goes hand in hand with this idea of the cabaret as a diversion. And it shows that the MC is not the spirit of freedom. He's not the force. He's not defined by opposition to Nazism. Do
you think he's just a reflection of it? I mean, the very first shot, the first character we see is Joel Grey's face coming into a reflection. And the final shot is also a reflection. Also, this is unrelated, but it is very interesting that there is no music that plays during the credits.
Yeah,
we
really
freeze
striking.
On this reflection of the audience.
Credits.
I think we get some sounds. I think we get
we hear some background of people sitting in the audience of the cabaret, but there's no music.
Yeah, diegetic only.
Diegetic only.
Even in the credits. So, yeah, it's completely silent. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that Joel Grey is partially there to represent the spirit of the Roaring Twenties, which is about self-indulgence and about self-enrichment in a very literal financial sense, while being ignorant or apathetic about anything on a grander scale politically. And so Joel Grey is partially representing...
The MC.
Thank you.
Joel Grey is there representing himself.
That's true. Joel Grey says he does not want to do any more MC characters. He does not want to play this character again. He's played it enough times. So, I think the MC is kind of representing if we're going to look at it politically, is representing the industrialist faction. He is the person, he is the people of the Roaring Twenties that find financial success and don't care about the Nazis and are sort of find it funny. It's not happening to them, whatever Sam Mendes might say about it. And so he is both representing people who are burying their heads in the sand and representing the people who are getting folded into the Nazi regime, because of course the Nazi regime is a corporatist regime and it actually doesn't have a strong social service element. It's all about turning control and power over to large corporations. And so Joel is representing, or the MC is representing, these financial interests who are happy to take your money and you can buy all the cognac that you want and have all the fun at the club, but they're not going to help you. They don't care about your problems. In fact, they find them kind of humorous.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on the "If You Could See Her Through My Eyes" scene? Yeah. So I think there's two ways of interpreting it, and maybe I have these two different versions because I've seen both the film and the Mendes play. So I think you can, if you haven't seen it, extended song about that the MC is singing about how no one understands his relationship with a woman who is in a gorilla costume. And at the end he says, "If you could see her through my eyes, she wouldn't look Jewish at all." And I think this can either be interpreted as, and it sort of depends on what the percentage of Nazis in the audience is, Jews look like gorillas, and like we're waiting for that, in line with the propagandistic imagery of the time. Or I am dating this gorilla, which is a weird thing to do, but people aren't actually concerned at the fact that I'm dating a gorilla. They're concerned at the fact that I'm dating a Jew. And like, isn't it ridiculous that you're willing to ignore the fact that I'm with this obviously unsuitable person for all of the right reasons, and you're just focused on the Judaism?
To partially not answer your question, it's tricky because it's entertaining, it's catchy. People know this song and remember it and mostly seem to enjoy it. It doesn't really have much to do with the plot of the film. And several other...
I think it really has a lot to do with the plot of the film. Even more the film than the stage show. Because this comes interspersed between the scenes between Fritz and Natalia. Natalia refuses to date Fritz because she's Jewish and she doesn't want to bring him into the whole mess because Jews are going to get kicked out of the country, as she can tell. So it's about a relationship between a Jew and a Christian.
Sure. I guess it doesn't mirror the events of the play because it's not Fritz who is at all worried about being with her. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's maybe reflecting what Natalia is imagining. Yeah. Like, Natalia thinks if we walk around, everyone's going to hate Fritz and we're going to get yelled at because we're different.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. So, I think there are good reasons for it to be in the movie. I don't know that we need it. That's not what you're asking me. Could it be cut? Sure.
Yeah, I was actually asking you, I'm interested that it seems like my second interpretation never occurred to you.
Which was?
The conceit of the song is that drawing attention to the fact that people are complaining that she's Jewish when the actual problem is that she's a gorilla.
Oh, I see.
And isn't it ridiculous to complain about someone being Jewish?
Yeah.
When there's such a big, obvious, real problem.
That could be an interpretation of it. That's a multi-layered interpretation.
I'm a multi-layered kind of gal.
That's excellent. But it doesn't... That idea is not directly communicated by what we're experiencing on screen. And so...
I'm not sure what idea is being directly communicated by what we experience on screen.
Yes. So I think that's a legitimate interpretation, and I would be fine with someone, I think I would make a great journal article. I don't know that it really answers the question of the controversy, which is which is more about what our audience is going to generally be experiencing from this song. And I don't think an American audience is going to listen to this song and think, oh yeah, Jewish people are silly. That's not what American people are going to interpret it. They're going to interpret it about Nazism and about anti-Semitism. And it does appear to be taking a stance against that. But I think it would be fair to call the piece muddled. Mm-hmm. It's a muddled song, and that's not a compliment. I think it's also a fair criticism.
I think this film is really interesting in the extent to which it shows that the Nazi Party just murdered people. There's a bunch of people just like one guy dead on the street.
Yeah, that's the most powerful part of the movie.
Yeah.
It's just that dead body lying there. We don't know where he came from. It's not explained. I mean, the Nazi Party came to power partially because of wide-ranging political issues, but largely because in its neighborhoods of inner-city Berlin, there was ongoing guerrilla forces between communist groups and Nazi groups, and the communist forces won that guerrilla warfare. So it was a military conflict.
Nazis won that guerrilla warfare?
Yes.
You said communists.
Okay. Yes. Well, the communists lost, and the Nazis won in street battles. That's what determined the fate of Germany.
Yeah, and I think nowadays that's not generally how they're thought of. They're thought of, like, the Nazis are thought of as coming to power because, I don't know, Hitler was good at speeches or something.
Yeah, at this time, the Nazis weren't even a majority in parliament. So all those things did matter a lot, but a big factor there was that in any major industrial city, if you spoke out against the Nazis, they would kill you. And yes, I do think it's good that the film portrays that and it emphasizes that idea.
And now to talk about next episode, but first we have a correction for this episode. Georg von Trapp was only 25 years older than Maria, not 40, as I mentioned. I want to bring this up because there may come a day where we talk about a movie where another podcast was very adamant about the age of one of the actors, and they are incorrect, and we're going to needle them about it. So I need to make sure that we are accurate on this. If you know, you know. But next episode will be airing on Halloween. And so to celebrate, we are doing basically the maximal scary that Livy is willing to do. David, what are next episode's films?
We are doing I Am Legend from 2007 and Shaun of the Dead from 2004. Jason Mantzoukas got wrecked on this podcast.